It is true in Shanghai that a lot of people, like you're saying, Chris, experience this in a way that they never had before. The question is, when it's over, are they going to remember what happened? Are they going to kind of just rationalize it? Like, it was a hard month, but it was worth it. Or are they going to...
I feel like there's a lot of parallels between the U.S. and China and what you're just saying.
Oh.
Well, also, like, in any disaster, the wealthy fare better than the poor. But that's just a factor of having money, and that's what people do with their money. They spend it on things that buffer them from like the worst situations. But it's somewhat exacerbated in this disaster because, like, if you live in Shanghai, but you have like a large apartment with a balcony, you're going to have a much less bad lockdown experience than someone who's in a small, like, studio apartment with like 3 other people.
Yes.
Right.
Although the one thing is that people still had a hard time getting food. Even if you were well off, you had a hard time getting food.
Yeah. So, and if that is the case, really, like, then you're in big trouble. But, I think we'll see, because there also depends on how much people believe the post-lockdown propaganda. Like, yes, it was bad, but it would have been so much worse had we not locked down. And of course, it's very hard to refute that because they're not doing like, a controlled study on this. So you can't, like, you either believe the government's perspective or propaganda that this was the best possible thing we could have done, or you don't believe it.
Yeah, I think they overshot a little bit when they started all the propaganda about how we have to stick with zero COVID because we care about the vulnerable. Like, did you see these Xinhua articles and stuff like that? They were like, well, China is sticking with zero COVID because we're protecting the most vulnerable people in our society. The
Communist Party cares about protecting the most vulnerable.
On the other hand,
like
you
the
have
Uyghurs.
people literally people in Shanghai started keeping a log of everybody who had died during the lockdown. And a lot of people died through not being able to go to the hospital because they wouldn't let them out. So, people with kidney failure who needed dialysis, who couldn't get dialysis, people with cancer, people with heart problems. Like, there were dozens of these kinds of stories of people who are elderly and needed to go to the hospital and weren't allowed out to go to the hospital. There's scandals where, and this is another place where it kind of sounds like the things that happen in New York, people in like elderly care facilities, nursing homes, hospitals, who are getting sick and dying, and no one, like, that was being kept quiet within the facilities. So people like didn't know that their relatives were dying. They couldn't reach people.
I'm just so glad we live in a country where, like, if an official did that, they'd be taken to task for it. There would be justice.
Well, I mean, I don't think you're going to see any justice in China, so it's not really.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm so glad we're in.
So
anyway,
like, the Communist Party obviously likes to talk about protecting the vulnerable when what they're really doing is letting the weak and the sick die off.
I don't think they meant to.
No, they're letting it happen, though.
I think that it would be better for the propaganda if people didn't die, right? Because this is the thing that's undermining people in Shanghai, their belief that this is the best way.
Right.
But that is essentially the system that they've created. And the way that accountability works in that system is that you try to hide the bad stuff that's happening as much as possible.
Well, because it is like a nightmare bureaucracy. It's like that movie Brazil. Like, it's not like all of these like horrible things that happened are like specifically planned, although the party certainly does have many like intentional kills under its belt. It's just like some decision is made and there's this whole bureaucratic process, and then like people suffer. Like the woman who got stuck on a bridge between 2 cities that shut down.
I mean, there were phone calls that were leaked of people at the Shanghai CDC talking about how frustrated they were and like calling this a whole political thing, and it's not about people's health. You had low-level officials, like people who are in charge of neighborhood committees or something like that, crying on the phone because they couldn't there's nobody that could call. There's like they're responsible at the very basic level, like at the neighborhood level, for implementing some of these things or trying to get food to people on the stuff, and they can't reach anybody. There's the literally the emergency numbers in Shanghai. Nobody was answering the phone. I mean, this is not happening for a month, but there were days where nobody was answering the phone. So if you had like 911, you're calling 911 and nobody answers. Like,
pretty crazy.
Yeah, so that's the situation. So I think a lot of people's confidence in the party was definitely shattered. And then when the party pushes the propaganda that's like, we're protecting people who are vulnerable, then that makes people even more angry, right?
Well, this is like a fundamental issue with like the idea of like, sort of like a free society versus like socialism and communism. Like the party portrays itself as like super capable, that it can handle all of society when it obviously can't, versus, just like letting people actually govern themselves. Like there's an appeal to have like, the smart people, the experts, they're going to handle everything so much better than like just trusting, Joe Blow down the street who's an idiot.
Well, I think that is the mistake that a lot of people make with the Communist Party. They only see the propaganda and they're like, oh, China is led by engineers and technocrats and people who
a meritocracy.
Like, yes, they're gonna, and it's because you don't see the stories. They've so well stopped any of that news from getting out. But things like Shanghai, it makes it easier to see.
Yeah, and even very capable people can be subject to the whims of politics, or they can just make stupid mistakes.
And politics in China is the most important thing. Like the political decrees by the Chinese Communist Party, those are the things that have to be followed. So a lot of the more ridiculous things that happened in Shanghai actually happened after Vice Premier Sun Chunlan, who's been in charge, quote unquote, of China's COVID lockdowns. Like she is the one that always comes. Xi Jinping's not going to come to Shanghai and inspect the lockdown, right? He doesn't want to get COVID. So they send Sun Chunlan around to, and wherever she goes, harsher lockdowns follow because that is the policy, right? So she goes around saying like, you need to lock down harder. And then you have ridiculous things like them putting up all these green fences everywhere in front of buildings, in front of people's doors. Have you seen this? Like
green fences? What is that?
They're colored green.
So
they're fences.
So they block COVID.
It's
like,
fencing.
I believe it.
It's fencing that's green, and they're just like fencing off streets, fencing off people's doorways. Like, and it's not clear what the fencing is supposed to do. People were already locked down, right?
It doesn't matter what it's for. They're doing something, Shelley.
There are reports that like people in districts where people were testing negative, people were being moved out of their apartment buildings so they could disinfect, quote unquote, the apartment buildings. Some people were moved to different provinces, and like people are like, why is this happening? Nobody knows why this is the policy, right? And they're spreading lime powder in the streets. Like it's just all this stuff that's for show, to like show that they're doing it harder now, right? Like they're following the policy.
I saw this video of like this old lady who got back from a quarantine camp, and she goes inside. She's welcomed back inside her apartment complex, and like a guy just like holds up a disinfectant thing and like sprays her full blast in the face.
That's not how it works.